Ever get that feeling like you're just scratching the surface, when it comes to really understanding what's happening in these cutting edge fields? Like you're missing those crucial insights.
I think we've all been there. It's tough to keep up with everything, right?
Well, today we're taking a deep dive, a deep dive into a topic that I think a lot of people are curious about, but maybe don't have the time to really dig into.
Absolutely. And we've got some fascinating stuff to cover that honestly gave me a shortcut to understanding something I've been meaning to wrap my head around for a while now. Finding the raw materials that are so crucial for, well, basically everything in the modern world.
Okay, so to set the stage for our listeners, let's talk about what we're diving into. We're looking at how artificial intelligence, and specifically a type called deep learning, is revolutionizing the way we search for mineral deposits.
It's pretty mind-blowing stuff. Forget those old school images of geologists out in the field with their hammers and maps. Now, we're talking about using AI to analyze massive amounts of data from satellites to pinpoint potential mining sites.
And this isn't just some futuristic fantasy. This is happening right now, and it has huge implications for all of us. I mean, think about it. Everything around us, from our smartphones to our cars to those green energy technologies everyone's talking about, like solar panels and wind turbines, they all require vast amounts of raw materials.
Right. And traditional mineral exploration, it can be incredibly slow and expensive. It can take decades to go from initial surveys to actually finding a deposit that's worth mining.
Yeah.
So finding more efficient and cost-effective ways to do that is a pretty big deal.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really get into the nitty-gritty of how this AI, specifically a type of model called a convolutional neural network-CNN for short, is being used to find potential porphyry deposits.
Those are a big deal, right?
Yeah, huge. These porphyry deposits are the world's most important source of copper and molybdenum. And guess what? They're also major sources of gold, silver, and even tin. We're talking about deposits that account for something like 50 to 60% of global copper production and over 95% of the world's molybdenum.
Okay.
So no small potatoes, right?
Right. And what's fascinating is that these porphyry deposits, they leave behind these telltale signs. Think of them like geological breadcrumbs. They're called hydrothermal alteration zones, and they form when hot, mineral-rich fluids interact with the surrounding rocks, changing their composition and mineral makeup.
So these changes are happening deep underground, but somehow we can see them from space. How does that even work?
Well, that's where this incredible technology comes in. We can use multispectral imagery from satellites, specifically data from something called the Advanced Spaceborne Thermal Emission and Reflection Radiometer, or ASTER for short. It's a much more cost-effective way to survey vast areas compared to, sending teams of geologists out into remote and often treacherous terrain.
ASTER, okay. I've heard of it.
It's pretty impressive. ASTER collects data across 14 different spectral bands, kind of like having different filters on a camera lens. Each band captures a different part of the light spectrum, reflecting off the Earth's surface, revealing unique mineral signatures that our eyes can't see. And the best part, this ASTER data is freely available, which makes it an incredibly powerful tool for geologists all over the world.
That free data part is pretty remarkable, but I'm imagining that the amount of data coming down from these satellites must be absolutely overwhelming, like trying to find a needle in a haystack, right?
You're spot on. We're talking about enormous data sets.
Mm-hmm.
To actually extract meaningful information from all that data and find those subtle clues that point to valuable mineral deposits, we need intelligent and rapid ways to analyze these images. And that's where artificial intelligence and specifically machine learning comes in.
Okay, so let's break down this power of deep learning a bit. You said AI and machine learning can help us make sense of all this satellite data. How exactly do these smart computers do that?
Well, these techniques offer a way to automatically sift through all that raw satellite data and pull out the valuable information. So instead of needing to manually enhance the images and then visually interpret them, which is incredibly time-consuming, the AI can actually learn to identify those important features itself. And the specific type of deep learning that we're focusing on here, those convolutional neural networks, the CNNs, they're really designed for this kind of task, analyzing high-resolution images and picking out complex patterns.
CNNs for images, yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, these satellite images must be absolutely huge. How did they deal with the computational power needed to process something that big?
Good question. To tackle those high-resolution images, researchers came up with a really clever approach called a patch-based strategy. It's basically like taking a giant jigsaw puzzle and dividing it into smaller, more manageable pieces. They even used an overlapping window when they did this, which ensures that no crucial information is lost at the edges where those pieces meet up.
Oh, that's clever. So they're not trying to solve the whole massive puzzle at once. The CNN looks at all these little pieces individually, right?
Exactly. And this is where it gets really cool. The CNN learns by being shown examples of what it's looking for. So it's given these manually labeled patches, little pieces of areas where hydrothermal alteration is already known to exist. And by analyzing these examples, the CNN starts to recognize the specific visual patterns, those unique mineral signatures we talked about, that indicate these alterations. It's kind of like teaching it what to look for by showing it what it is.
So it's learning to be a geological detective in a way.
Precisely. And what's really exciting is that this isn't just a one-trick pony for porphyry deposits. Researchers believe that this type of AI could be used to find other types of ore deposits that leave behind different kinds of geological footprints. And it could even be used with different kinds of satellite imagery that capture other types of information. So the potential here is huge.
That's amazing. It's not just limited to this one specific application. You mentioned earlier that ASTER data being freely available is a big advantage. What else makes ASTER so useful for this kind of research, for training this AI detective?
Well, aside from the cost savings, ASTER has a proven track record. Previous research has shown it to be quite effective at mapping these hydrothermal alteration zones, especially in arid and semi-arid regions like parts of Egypt. And ASTER has good spectral resolution. It can see in those 14 different bands across the visible and infrared parts of the light spectrum. So it's kind of like seeing in more colors than we can. And each of those colors tells us something different about the mineral composition of the rocks. And it also has decent spatial resolution, down to 15 meters for some of those bands, which means it can see fairly fine details on the ground.
So it sees in enough detail to be useful, and it sees in these different colors that reveal the rock's composition. But you mentioned that the raw satellite images need some prep work. What are those pre-processing steps?
Right. Before the AI can really get to work and learn effectively, the raw ASTER imagery needs to be cleaned up a bit. That involves things like geometric correction, which is making sure that the satellite image lines up perfectly with the map so you know exactly what part of the Earth you're looking at. Then there's atmospheric correction. Our atmosphere can actually distort the colors that the satellite sees, so they have to correct for that to get a true picture of what's on the ground. And for the shortwave infrared data, they also have to correct for something called crosstalk, which is like interference between the different data channels, and parallax errors, which can occur because the satellite is viewing the ground from slightly different angles as it passes overhead. And finally, they resample all those spectral bands to a unified spatial resolution of 15 meters, so all the different color layers line up perfectly.
So it's like prepping a canvas for a painter. Once the images are cleaned up, how does the model actually learn to identify those potential deposit zones?
So they start with those nice, clean satellite images. Then comes a really crucial step: manual annotation. Expert geologists, people who really know their stuff, look at those pre-processed images and carefully identify specific regions of interest, or ROIs, where porphyry deposits are already known to exist. They use all their expert knowledge and techniques, like looking at ratios of different spectral bands, to highlight those mineral signatures.
So they're essentially showing the AI the answers. Like, here are the areas where we know these deposits exist, so it can learn to recognize the patterns, right?
Exactly. Once they have those annotated images, they break them down into those smaller segments, those tiles we talked about. And then the CNN looks at each of those tiles and tries to classify it. Does this tile show signs of those hydrothermal alterations that we taught it to recognize?
And you emphasize that this manual annotation by experts is really important. Why is that so crucial? Couldn't the AI just figure this out on its own with all that data?
It's a really good question. And the answer is that those expert geologists, they're using years of training and experience, along with those specific techniques like band ratios and mathematical band blending, to very precisely identify those unique spectral signatures of the alteration minerals. This creates highly accurate training data, what they call masks, for the AI to learn from. Without that precise human input initially, the AI wouldn't know what to look for, wouldn't have those clear examples to learn from.
Okay, that makes sense. It needs those really good examples. And then you mentioned something called data augmentation. What's that all about?
Right, so they use data augmentation, which is a really clever way to make the most of that valuable training data. They take those training tiles, those little pieces of the annotated images, and create slightly modified versions of them. They randomly rotate them, flip them horizontally or vertically, or even slightly change their scale. And this artificially increases the size and diversity of the training data, which helps the CNN become more robust, less likely to get stuck on the specific characteristics of just those original training images.
So like showing the AI the same image from different angles and in different lighting so it learns to recognize the underlying features regardless of those variations.
Exactly. And as the CNN analyzes those tiles, it develops what they call tile spectra, a sort of spectral fingerprint for each tile. And then by searching for other tiles across a large area that have similar spectral fingerprints, it can identify potential new zones of hydrothermal alteration.
This is all really fascinating. So let's talk about the results. Did this deep learning approach actually work in real-world tests?
It did. The results were very encouraging. The researchers were able to show that these deep learning CNNs could successfully identify those hydrothermal alteration zones, and with a high degree of accuracy.
That's great to hear. And they didn't just test this in one specific location, right?
No, they were very thorough. They used a clever geographic sampling strategy, testing this approach on multispectral imagery from 20 different regions all over the world. And to make sure that their results weren't just due to the model overfitting to specific environments, they used a leave one out protocol.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so imagine you're studying for a really important exam. You have 20 practice exams to prepare with. With this leave one out approach, you would study using 19 of those practice exams and then test yourself on the one you didn't study. And you would do that 20 times, each time leaving out a different practice exam.
Oh, so you get a much better sense of whether you actually understand the material rather than just memorizing the answers to a specific set of questions.
Exactly. It's the same idea here. They trained the model on data from 19 regions and then tested it on a region it had never seen before during training. This helped to prove that the model could generalize its learning and apply it to completely new areas.
So it wasn't just recognizing patterns that it specifically memorized. That's really impressive. Did they find that it worked equally well in all those different regions?
Well, they did see some variation in performance. The model performed particularly well in regions like Iran, Pakistan, and the USA. But it had a bit more trouble, a lower accuracy, in places like Sudan and Argentina. And this suggests that maybe some regions just have more distinctive spectral signatures of hydrothermal alteration that are easier for the AI to learn. Or maybe the training data they had was more representative of some regions than others.
That makes sense. Some geological fingerprints are probably more obvious than others. Did they ever point this AI at a completely new area, like a place where it had zero training data from that specific region?
They did. They tested the model on completely unseen regions in China, and it still performed well. And that's a really strong indicator that this approach has real-world potential for discovering new resources in places we haven't even explored yet.
That's incredible. So what are the big takeaways here? What does this mean for the future of finding these valuable metals?
It's really significant. This opens up so many possibilities. It could allow us to explore remote and underexplored areas that are difficult or just too expensive to access with traditional methods. This could lead to discovering brand new porphyry deposits that we didn't even know existed.
That's amazing. And it's not just about finding more deposits, right? It's about finding them more efficiently and intelligently.
Precisely. Deep learning can pick up on subtle patterns in the satellite data that even the most experienced geologists might miss. And this can lead to much more accurate predictions of where those valuable deposits are likely to be, allowing us to target exploration efforts much more effectively. Ultimately, this could lead to more efficient and sustainable resource exploration, which is absolutely critical considering the increasing demand for these minerals.
So you mentioned that specific deep learning model they use, DeepLab v3 plus ANNER. Anything special about that particular architecture for this task?
Yeah, DeepLab v3 Plus is a type of deep convolutional neural network that's especially well suited for image segmentation tasks, which means it's good at accurately identifying and outlining specific regions of interest within an image. And in this case, those regions of interest are the hydrothermal alteration zones. It uses some very clever techniques like additive convolutions, which allow the AI to see the broader context of the alteration zones without needing a massive amount of computational power.
So it's not just looking at individual pixels in isolation, but also considering the surrounding patterns and features.
Exactly. And that key point out strategy they used for training and testing, where they deliberately held back data from one entire geographic region at a time, was crucial for making sure that the model could really generalize its learning and perform well in completely new, unseen regions.
So even with all this potential, are there still challenges to using AI for mineral exploration? Like, what are some of the hurdles that still need to be overcome?
Of course. Remote sensing data, by its very nature, can be quite variable. Things like differences in sunlight and shadow, variations in atmospheric conditions, and even just slight natural variations in how minerals reflect light can make it challenging for the AI to do its job perfectly. That's why that careful training pipeline and those data augmentation techniques are so important. They help the model become more robust and less sensitive to those real-world variations in the data.
So it's learning to filter out the noise and focus on those crucial signals.
You could say that, yeah. And the researchers have also suggested some interesting directions for future work. For example, they're interested in applying this approach to other types of mineral deposits, ones that might have different spectral characteristics. And they're also looking at incorporating other kinds of data, like hyperspectral imagery, which captures even more detailed spectral information than ASTER, or even geophysical data, which tells us about what's going on beneath the Earth's surface.
It sounds like there's still so much to explore in this field.
Absolutely. The potential for more efficient and accurate identification of valuable mineral deposits using AI is huge. I think it has the potential to really change the way we approach mineral exploration and mining in the years to come.
So, to wrap things up for our listeners, what's the big takeaway from all of this?
Well, the key takeaway is that deep learning, and specifically using these convolutional neural networks to analyze multispectral satellite imagery, like that from ASTER, provides a powerful and incredibly innovative new tool for mineral exploration. It allows us to accurately identify those hydrothermal alteration zones on the Earth's surface, which are strong indicators of potentially valuable porphyry deposits hiding beneath.
It's really mind-blowing to think that we can now use AI to see those subtle geological clues from all the way up in space, right?
It is pretty remarkable, and it makes you think. What are the broader implications of this kind of technology? How might it change our understanding of the Earth's resources and our ability to find the materials we need, not just for our current technologies, but for a more sustainable future as well? What possibilities might this kind of AI-driven vision unlock that we haven't even thought of yet?
That's a fantastic question to leave our listeners with. It really highlights the potential of AI to change not just the way we find resources, but also the way we understand our planet as a whole. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.